What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the early read SEC conference preview. Probably the most consequential conference in college football. It's them or the Big 12 or Big 10. Sorry. We'll stick with the SEC though. And to do that, we bring on who we had on last year, Graham Coffey. He is the publisher and co-founder of Dog Central at Graham Coffey DC, GrahamCoffey DC. Graham came on last year. He did the SEC preview, absolutely crushed it. He was very bullish on Missouri. I was very bearish, and he very much was on the right side of that one. So had to have Graham back on to see if he could instill some more knowledge on us as we get ready for SEC football. Graham, how's it going, man?
It's going well, man. Can't believe we're already here in kind of preview pod season, but very excited to get ready for another season of college football and the longest season of college football we've ever had. So yeah.
Yeah, and we were talking right before we hopped on the really, I think, renewed or hyper focus, however you want to call it, around college football, especially. And I think that really kind of stems from the SEC getting teams like Texas and Oklahoma, and the Big Ten bringing in some of those Pac-12 teams. You said you were at SEC Media Day. You don't need to get like super high, like super into the weeds here, but is there anything you maybe noticed there or something that you left there thinking maybe with the new conference, this is something we got to keep an eye on? Like, where's your head at after SEC Media Day last week?
Yeah, it was, we were in Dallas. So the kind of the weight of the Texas and Oklahoma editions was obviously very much like front and center. And I would say kind of the theme of the week. At the same time, those are two tremendous brands. And also like Kirby Smart came to town and Kalen DeBoer came to town. And, you've got all these other big programs. And so just the depth of this conference going through the rankings and being like, oh, like I like Tennessee and they still could be, 8th in the league. And that still might not be a bad season. It's a little bit crazy to try and kind of wrap your head around what exactly success looks like for some of these programs now with Texas and Oklahoma in the league, and how to kind of judge the type of jobs that these coaches are doing, because it's going to be a gauntlet for some of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, look at Florida, and we're going to talk about them later on, but you can make a case talent-wise, Florida top 30, top 20 team in the country, just pure talent and power rating perspective. Their schedule is harder than any team I could even remember. At a good year is 6-6. Like, I think that Billy Napier definitely needs to keep his job, but it won't look good to Florida because, we won 6-6. We're not a contender like that. We're going to go through their schedule. Some of these schedules in the SEC, there's nothing you can do but just put your hands in the air and say, we have a gauntlet of a schedule.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And, I think obviously I cover Georgia, and you look at that schedule and it's like I think they're probably the best team in the league. They certainly have the least number of questions coming into the season. And also they go to Alabama, they go to Texas, they go to Ole Miss. If they're 10-2 at the end of a 12-game schedule, do I really feel worse about them coming into the playoff? Like, is that a red flag? I don't know. Obviously, it will depend on, how that might happen and how some of these other teams actually look compared to their preseason expectations. But I think Billy Napier in Florida, you brought them up, like they have the worst schedule I've ever seen in my life. And also I think that like Graham Mertz did an underrated job last year and was better than he gets credit for. And, you go up and down their roster and it's like, they do have some nice pieces that I think like you could form a functional winning team out of under normal circumstances. I don't know if you can do it with the schedule they've got though.
Yeah. And so college football playoffs going to come around, and you were just talking about the depth of the SEC as a whole. Just gut feeling. I didn't prep you on this or anything, but how many do you think like three SEC teams end up making the playoff? It's definitely going to be at least 2, 3, could 4 make it? Like, how deep and how much do you think the committee is going to weigh on putting in those SEC teams, given how deep this conference really is?
Well, I think that is my biggest concern for, the SEC at large, is that I've done a lot of kind of like, I don't know, watchdog sort of content around the college football playoff selection process
Mhm.
over the last decade because I'm kind of fascinated by it. And there's been different years with different controversies and all of that. And to this point, we have never seen a college football playoff committee that didn't rank teams by the loss column, right? Like 2017 Auburn is really the one instance of a team where if they had beaten Georgia in that SEC championship game, they would have gone to the playoff with 2 losses because, they had run through that end of that schedule and beaten a number 1 Georgia team and then beaten, I think, a second ranked Alabama team. Like they had kind of done enough to erase the memory of the early season. But yeah, I mean, you look at Georgia last year, like I don't think there's that many people that would argue they weren't. I mean, most people I think still think they were probably the best team.
If
Certainly
not, they were a
nobody.
close second.
Yeah, they certainly were one of the 4 best teams. There's no
Yeah.
question about that. But like we played the comparative, the comparative analysis game and the transitive property game, and we ended up with Texas and Alabama jumping from I think 6 and 7 on the final weekend to 3rd and 4th. So I think that is going to be, the biggest like storyline of this season for me across all of college football is how are they going to kind of grade these teams because like a 1-loss Big 12 team probably isn't better than, a 2-loss Georgia with the schedule that Georgia's going to have. How will they seed that? I think if we're being realistic and honest about the composition of, some of these rosters, the SEC probably should get 4 teams in.
Yeah.
Hell, they should get 5 if we're really being real about it. Some of that's going to depend on how some of these other leagues look and how it all shakes out. But yeah, I'm not sure, and I think that's what everyone in the SEC should be worried about. And I think that was kind of the risk that you took when you brought Texas and Oklahoma into the league prior to really knowing exactly what the structure of this new expanded playoff is going to look like.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting subplot, and we're going to talk a bunch of betting here. And you want to talk about like betting opportunity, like the make miss playoff market that is probably going to be updated every week. Like if you compare it to the NFL, like where that's updated regularly, like no one really knows where this is all going. This 12-team playoff in terms of how it's going to be seeded, how it's going to be selected. Obviously, outside the auto bids and the at larges, you could probably find some mispriced markets as the season goes on. So I'm interested to see where we land on kind of how we see the SEC hierarchy. We'll start though with your Georgia Bulldogs. You cover them. You run this great site, Dog Central, that is as plugged into Georgia football as I see on the internet. What's the vibe around the Bulldogs going into this year? Because you mentioned a few minutes ago arguably the best team in the country, don't even make the playoff, had the 3-peat. And when I had you on last year, you were not like, puffing your chest out saying, yeah, they're going to 3-peat, but you said, I think they're the best team. And, I think something, we'll see where the slip up is, but I'm expecting them to at least be in the mix again. Is this like a redeem team situation for Carson Beck in Georgia, or is it just another year turn the page, business as usual with some of the turnover on the roster?
I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. We asked about that last week in Dallas, and Kirby Smart was pretty like, I've never used a past season's result to inform how we get ready for the next season. That's great coach speak. Yeah. Now, I'll just tell you, from the anecdotal stuff that I hear and from talking to sources, like it does seem like that team has had an easier job, an easier time getting motivated and doing all of that hard off-season work that they need to. And I think this time of year, you're really looking at like player-led practices, right? And they've been practicing hard, right? Like, without the coaches there and all of that stuff, Carson Beck and some of these other senior leaders have really made a point of kind of getting this team moving in the right direction here before fall camp starts for them on July 31st. So, yes, I think that there is certainly a vibe within the players, at least, of like, we were the best team and we went out and beat Florida State by 60. And that sucked because we weren't playing in the playoff, and that's what we've become accustomed to doing. I think for Georgia, going into the season right now at this moment, without any, injury stuff or anything like that, I think that privately, if you gave them truth serum, probably most everyone in that locker room would say like it's title game or bust for us, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, the national championship favorite, win total 10.5, 2-1 to win the conference. And actually, I mean, Carson Beck's back. Running back, some turnover, but you land arguably the best transfer running back in Trevor Etienne. Wide receivers, it's not Lad McConkey. It's not tight end you want to throw in there. It's not Brock Bowers, but pretty, I would say, formidable wide receiver room that's deep as well. Maybe it's not the star power, but I mean, between Lovett, Colby Young, the Miami transfer, you have Dylan Bell and Arian Smith also adding some depth there as well. Tight end, I mean, Eurosek. I was impressed watching him at Stanford. I think this offense, you could argue very little drop off, in my opinion, especially with another year of Carson Beck.
Yeah, absolutely. I would actually maybe even argue that they'll take a step forward.
That's
Like
okay. I didn't want to come off a little too aggressive, but you look at, they lose some star power, but with all the guys coming up, like there's more than enough talent here to get even better, especially if you really let Carson Beck and another year of the Mike Bobo system cook.
certainly, and I think that in some ways, uh, having McConkey and Bowers obviously great. Like, not ever going to sit here and make an argument that that's a bad thing for a football team, but I think that Georgia at times got a little bit too fixated on kind of force feeding those guys, particularly after they both had like lower body injuries that changed fundamentally who they were as players in the SEC championship game. Like, there were a lot of plays in the SEC championship game where like you look and Dom Lovett is the third read and he's running wide open somewhere underneath, and Beck is trying to like kind of force feed Bowers up the seam when Bowers can't cut like he used to, and he's not able to get separation against an NFL secondary essentially that Alabama had on the field. So I think that for Georgia, you saw them be really successful in 2021 and especially in 2022 when they had like you see games where Stetson Bennett would come out and he would hit like 11 receivers in the first half kind of thing. And it's just sort of, there's not one guy you take away and stop them. I think that this offense can be similar for them. You named a lot of the key players coming back in, but like they got a guy, Anthony Evans, right, who I think will compete for snaps at that Z receiver position, who is as fast, if not faster, than Arian Smith, and kind of started to shine a little bit at the end of last season. Like, they've got a lot of these pieces, and I think, truthfully, for the offense with Ra Thomas and Colby Young, the Miami transfer, it's really the first time since I've covered Georgia where I've seen them come in and have two formidable true X receivers on that roster. They've really not had kind of that healthy presence at X since George Pickens in 2020. Honestly, like they've had some bad injury luck at that position, and so you start looking at them in the red zone. Putting Colby Young on one side and putting Ra Thomas on the other side, some of the matchup problems that can create. I think with Beck and just as accurate as he's shown he can be, things can get exciting for them pretty quick.
And you look at the defense, there's so much turnover, of course, but they bring back their top 3 tacklers from last season. Maybe they don't have the star power that we've become accustomed to with Georgia, where they just have like absolute monster game records. I'm sure that there's going to be pros on this defense. But again, the secondary should be absolutely fine with Starks back. And I think with the likes of Stackhouse back, I think that there's enough here that this Georgia defense is going to be business as usual, correct? I mean, again, league average in returning production, but you could argue this is still the most talented defense in the entire country.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like last year's Georgia defense, that's been one of the big themes of the offseason, honestly, talking to players, is like, we didn't play up to our standard. You start going down the numbers, it's like, well, you guys were 5th in scoring defense. That's not too bad. You were 9th in yards per game given up, 1st in third down conversion percentage allowed. Rushing defense for them is where things struggled last year, right? They did give up 114 yards a game, which was 20th after being like a top 5 rushing defense for a few years in a row. I think a lot of that was due. They had Marvin Jones Jr. on the edge, and that kind of didn't work out. And he's at Florida State now. There's 3 guys that have come up and that will be sophomores this year that were like rated as 5-star prospects at some point in Damon Wilson, Gabe Harris, who's more of a true defensive end, and Samuel Mpemba. One of those guys has to hit for them, in my opinion, for them to kind of be what they need to be. But you look at the front 7, Michael Williams, I think, is that game record kind of presence and will play more of he'll play more as a stand-up pass rusher this year than he has the last couple of years. And I think that will certainly help them with pass rush. The linebacker situation is going to be interesting because you've got Mondon coming off an injury, and then you've got CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson, who both played in that SEC championship game and both were true freshmen out there. I think the expectation is both of them take another step forward. The secondary is where, like you said it, they lost pieces, but they lost 4 defenders in the NFL draft, which sounds like a lot, but they lost 6 the year before and 8 the year before that. So yeah. I think if anything, on the defensive side, this is the most continuity we've seen in a while. And I expect them to kind of figure things out from a run defense standpoint. There's a lot of highly recruited talent. I don't want to go through like the depth chart reading, right, and say, here's the 11 guy, the 11 300 plus pound defensive linemen that they have on the roster, but it just feels like 1 or 2 of those has to hit, right? Yeah. In addition to Stackhouse kind of being a consistent presence that he's been the last couple of years.
So the schedule, I feel like the past few years, Georgia's schedule has been on the easier side of things for the SEC. I feel like they've gotten like the good end of the stick here in the SEC. New look SEC, I'd say this is a pretty challenging schedule and doesn't help. I mean, I know that they're 2 touchdown favorites against Clemson in week 1, but I would still consider that a competitive game.
Sure.
You go through the schedule. To me, it is pretty sure. Like, I'm not going to say that this team's going to drop back and it's going to be a struggle. I mean, there is a road trip to Alabama. They do play at Texas. They play at Ole Miss, and they host Tennessee. Those are really the 4, I would say, high stakes games. The rest, I think they should be able to take care of. I think this is the best team in the country entering the year. I'd put them 1. I'd put Oregon 2. So, Graham, you could go through the schedule, but to me, we look back at the end of the season. I have you on the podcast. I say, what went wrong for Georgia? What do you think it would be if you had to like put your finger on like this didn't go Georgia's way?
You're talking about for 2024?
Yeah. Like if we did a retrospective at the end of the year and Georgia, they make the playoff, they lose in the semifinals. Where did it go wrong?
I would think that if it went wrong, it would be they never found an interior defensive lineman that could really force double teams on the inside. Okay. They had that in 21 with Wyatt Davis. They had that in 22 with Carter, obviously, who was also there in 21 as well. Last year, they never found a defensive tackle or really an inside lineman that forced offenses to put 2 guys on him or he was going to wreck the game. And because of that, you saw other guys kind of struggle because instead of dealing with one-on-one blocking, there's backside help coming over and there's kind of zone protection schemes that are happening and guys are getting chipped late in the play. And I think that's the secret sauce for them because, there was conversation last year about Georgia's linebackers like struggling to defend some running out on the edge. And it's like, well, they were cheating inside because the inside of that defensive line wasn't what it had been, where it was like, we're going to plug everything and, we're not going to let offensive linemen get to the second level and we're not going to, let anybody gash us up the middle. So I think that's the spot I'm looking for. I think that offense is going to be humming. I think, they've got all the offensive line talent. They've got all the skill talent. They have Beck. I think the secondary will be pretty good. There's a spot or 2 that I have questions about, but there's too much talent for it not to work out. It's just who's going to be that dude on the defensive line,
So last question before we move on to the next team. Which team in the SEC are you most concerned about or you think is at Georgia's level? And it could be, I mean, Texas is seen as the second choice, could just be Texas, but is there a team that you're like, they maybe give me a little bit of concern?
So for me, it's not Texas, actually. I'm not as high on Texas as everybody else is, truthfully. I think if you look at Georgia, um, I know Saban's gone and all of that, but it's like they got to figure that whole Alabama situation out. Like they go to Alabama, and that is going to be a game that everyone is very excited for, obviously. And Georgia needs to go in there and win that football game, right? Ole Miss, I don't know if they've got like their first 22. I think is going to be really good. It's just I'm not sure if they'll have the waves of guys that they can throw at Georgia. So yeah, for me, it's Alabama, and if you look at Georgia's schedule in terms of kind of other spots where I could see them slipping up, Hugh Freeze has given Kirby Smart defenses problems going back to the time when he was at Ole Miss and Kirby was at Alabama. Like, obviously Georgia's more talented than Auburn, but that was really their closest regular season game last year, and Freeze has got the ability to kind of put anybody into a dogfight if he spent time preparing for them. So it's one I would watch.
Yeah, let's move on to Texas. You brought them up just there before. Don't see them maybe as highly as other teams do. I'm in the same boat as you. 10.5 win total, 320 to win the SEC. I mean, they're looked at as the fourth choice to win the national championship. This team, obviously, I mean, they go to the semifinal last year. They return a host of talent back, and what they do lose in some professional talent, they turned it over by crushing the transfer portal. Quinn Ewers is back at quarterback. It's worth mentioning Arch Manning is also there. Running back room is pretty much set with CJ Baxter and Jaden Blue. Wide receivers, sure, they lose Worthy. They lose A.D. Mitchell. They lose Sanders at tight end. They really did a fantastic job. I think it's going to look different, but it's still as talented, in my opinion, between Silas Bolden and now I'm drawing a blank on the other wide receiver's name that I wrote down. Isaiah Bond. Sorry, completely drew a blank there.
No, you're good.
So I still think in the offensive line, 5 starters back, top 30 in returning production. So his offense, I think, high floor. I have my concerns if Quinn Ewers brings up the ceiling as high as
you got it.
Maybe people think. Sark could scheme it all up, but I'm not a Quinn Ewers believer. With those guys, it might not matter, but I think, we saw against Washington, there comes a point where you're going to need to make some high level throws. And he did against Alabama last year. He, kind of choked up against Texas, but yeah, you go about Quinn before we talk about the defense.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think my big thing with Ewers, right, is you had A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, and Jatavian Sanders all on the same team, right? Like those guys are, all very good players, all NFL players. Even with that receiving core that he had last year, Ewers completed 16 passes of 20-plus air yards all year. And like you said, I mean, I think a decent chunk of those came in that game against Alabama. Some of those were amazing plays by the Texas receivers. I just don't buy it. I mean, like I thought he would take a leap going into last year, and he did take a step forward because he went from basically completing like 0 passes of 20-plus yards the year before. But I don't think he's that dude. I don't think that, I like what they did in the portal at wide receiver, but I'm still not going to call those guys an upgrade over what they had at all. So, yeah, I think that's my big concern for them offensively. In a way, I almost wonder if him struggling early in the season might be a good thing for Texas because it could get Arch, a half season of experience before a playoff run. I also could see a scenario where, it's like has Sark really built that locker room and that culture to a point where they can handle a quarterback dilemma like that without it kind of tearing everybody apart.
Plenty of receivers on the team last year that went to the NFL, only 16 big time throws, 8 turnover worthy plays on 394 pass attempts for Quinn Ewers, according to PFF. Again, you mentioned the deep ball. There's just I don't know. I thought the OU game, he kind of dropped the ball. I'd say only one big time throw in Red River, 2 turnover worthy plays. It's just, I don't know. I think he's kind of like this scheme really is what makes this all go, not necessarily the quarterback. And maybe it is, this team could have so much talent that doesn't matter. They could still go to the playoff and still compete in the SEC. I do think maybe first year, new conference, a much harder conference, you could see a bit of a slip up. I mean, the market's moved towards 10.5, way under. It's minus 175 now. So it makes some sense. I will say, though, the defense, they have some players, I think. They would get Trey Moore from UTSA. He had 13 sacks last year. Anthony Hill, freshman linebacker last year. He's only going to get better.
Yeah.
Makuba from Clemson in the secondary. I think the defense should be pretty fine, but there is worth noting, though, team was 3rd in red zone touchdown percentage defense, top 20 in turnovers gained, 2nd and 3rd down defensive conversion percentage. So, yes, this team is super talented, but there's some things that are making me hold back to, like, I don't really see this team as like a national championship contender. You have to put them in the playoff conversation, of course, but I just think there might be a little bit of a drop in class there from Georgia to Texas.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what that team was built on defensively last year, right? And it was all, in my mind, centered around those 2 defensive tackles that they had in Sweat and Murphy, right? Like, those guys were both All-American defensive tackles. Like, it's something like what Georgia had in 2021 with Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt. Like, not as deep, but I mean, like, so the fact that they didn't cash that in a bigger way. I know they made the playoff, but the fact they didn't catch that in a bigger way, like, looking back now, is a little bit of a red flag for me, honestly. You can blame the secondary for that, which was 116th in passing yards a game allowed.
Yeah.
So I look at that, and I think Makuba's a nice player, but, like, I don't know that he's a massive upgrade or an eraser of any kind. I also think what's interesting is, like, Texas kind of built to this point under Sark. Not saying they haven't recruited well, because they have, but, like, they also supplemented that recruiting by basically poaching off SEC rosters, right?
Yeah.
Now they're in the SEC. They can't poach off SEC rosters anymore because of the rules that they have about interconference transfers. So I guess, like, some of those players you're talking about, the UTSA kid with the 13 sacks, like, good player, and if they were going in the Big 12 and he was facing Big 12 tackles every week, I would probably be higher on him than I am. Like, you got to go deal with, like, Ernest Green or, the LSU kids like Campbell. And like, it's just, there is a difference on the line of scrimmage in this league than what Texas has gotten used to. And I saw that offensive line of Washington push them around in the CFP, and it's been hard to unsee that. And the final thing I'll say really about their defense, honestly, is just they are relying on a kid to, Bill Norton, who is not a bad player by any means, and he was good for Arizona last year, but it's like he was on Georgia's roster a couple of years ago and couldn't really crack into the rotation or see the field after 3 years in the program, so he left to go to Arizona. It's like you're trying to go beat Georgia with Georgia's castaways in a way.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I don't know that will work out super well in the long run, especially when you're trying to use that to replace the tackles that they had.
Yeah, and I think also it was so apparent. It's really what kind of landed me on. I when I bet Washington to beat Texas in the semis. Texas has a real issue, and I don't know if it's solvable. Maybe it was the guys on the roster last year, and they could fix it now with some of the new players. But they were out to the top 100 in red zone touchdown percentage. Like, when the field shrinks on Sark's offense, it really, really choked. I mean, it literally, that last drive against Washington was inside the red zone, and they choked up and they couldn't do it. It was sitting there watching. I was like, oh my God. Like, I felt like the handicap of my game was like sitting right there and it came through. But I don't know if that's maybe like he just needs more space or something, but Ewers inside the red zone, it just hasn't clicked. And I wonder if that's going to be another thing in these really high leverage games. Maybe this Texas offense maybe it's quarterback, maybe it's Sark's system. I don't know, but it just doesn't click all the way, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I do think you have seen that. I mean, the Alabama game, the first year Sark was there, the one that Ewers got injured in. I know that Hudson Card had to come in, and I'm not judging
Yeah.
Sark negatively by that necessarily, but still, like you watch them move the ball up and down the field all day on Alabama and walk away with I think less than 20 points in that game
Mhm.
because they just couldn't finish in the red zone. And it's college football, almost everybody's going to move the ball on everybody, but it's like that's where things get decided is in the
Mhm.
red zone, and they also get decided, on third downs. And I'm just not sure about I think Texas is going to be good on the offensive line. I think they can run the ball on some of the teams they will face, but I mean, I'll call my shot right now. Like I think that they'll lose to A&M on the final weekend of the year. I think that there is a universe because of Ewers' issues stretching the field where Michigan just bludgeons them to death with line of scrimmage play. And I also could see them I think Georgia will beat them. And I wouldn't be shocked if they find themselves in a competitive game with the likes of a Florida or a Kentucky or somebody that they probably shouldn't be in a competitive game with just because of turnover luck or, the inability to really create explosive plays with much consistency at all.
Yeah, you went through some of those key games, and of course, you can't throw out that Red Rivers always kind of throw
Sure.
the power ratings out. Those games always seem to be decided late and very hyper competitive. Uh, also the week after Red River, which is of course on a neutral site, they do go to Georgia or they host Georgia. Sorry, but still, week after you could have a bit of a hangover there for the Longhorns. Again, I mean, 10.5 juiced way under. You're not getting much in terms of like value or anything, but in terms of like maybe I could click through here, like maybe it's like miss the playoffs. Texas to miss the playoffs, like plus 184, long time to tie your money up. Like these are like I think we see the same way that
Is
like look at
have
these
you
ideas.
seen any alt line win totals for them yet?
I will click through and we'll circle back. Let's see.
I mean, like I'll look for one right now while we're talking, but yeah, man, like I wouldn't hate the idea of an alt line.
Under 9.5 is plus 160 at DraftKings.
That would be my play for Texas.
Yeah.
I know that I maybe 10 is still more likely than 9, but at plus 160, I think there is value there.
It is worth noting to give Texas some credit. Yes, they go to Michigan in week 2. There's a chance Michigan, their quarterback situation is a little too up in the air for a week 2 matchup. Georgia does come to Austin, Florida, Kentucky. They're in Austin, and then at Texas A&M. So some of the consequential games do come at home, which I guess would help. But I think we see eye to eye here.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you and I, which is actually really refreshing because last week in Dallas, it was like a lot of our fellow media members were really really high on Texas and very much like Texas is going to win the conference title or they're going to challenge Georgia and all of that. It's just like that's not where I see it personally.
I agree. I'm much higher on I would say several other teams as we go down the board. Alabama's next. Win total 9.5, minus 142 the under at FanDuel, 8-1 to win the SEC. Obviously, Nick Saban's no longer there. Kalen DeBoer comes in from Washington. Jalen Milroe's still there. At SC Media Day, to me, I know, and I started saying, I mean, Jalen Milroe, it's pretty crazy, but 24 big time throws on deep passes to 0 turnover worthy plays last year. I still don't know if I'm all the way there that he's a really good deep passer, and I definitely don't think he's a scheme fit here. So, how do you see this DeBoer Milroe partnership working? Like this Ty Simpson, who a lot of like
No,
people
that can't
people
happen,
before
can it?
last season were really on Ty Simpson. Like, how do you see this Alabama offense working? Is this kind of just like throw shit at the wall and hope it sticks? Like, or even like just like hope it works and worst case, it's a mulligan of a year?
I think DeBoer's better, probably a better organizer than that.
Mhm.
I do think that Milroe, like I remember doing the preview for the SEC championship and really digging into his game and feeling like, he was basically kind of this boom or bust quarterback, right?
Yes.
Where it's like, it's almost like they're going to play deep ball roulette, and we'll just sort of see what happens in terms of, whether those guys get tackled after the catch or score touchdowns, and, B, how many hits. And that's the question for me, is just, I don't know. I think Kalen DeBoer is really good at what he does. I'm not sure that Jalen Milroe is ever going to be like an accurate underneath the intermediate passer. And it's really hard to possess the football when that's the case. It's really hard to kind of wear teams down. It's hard to run the clock out. And I don't know if he'll be a scheme fit. The flip side of that is like what Washington did in the vertical passing game last year was really impressive. And, that was all built around a deep ball thrower in Penix. Like, I just don't think Alabama's got 3 NFL wide receivers that are
That's what I was
going
going
to
to
try
say.
out this year. Yeah.
I don't think that, and again, he took the job after the national championship game, like after the coaching cycle. The roster, I don't think, is where he wants it to be, whether he likes Milroe or not. Getting Bernard from Washington, who I know everybody was really high on in the portal, that's a nice get. I just don't think the roster's really there right now.
Right.
Offensive line, sneaky, wasn't very good last year. That
They
was
gave up 49 sacks last year.
Yeah, and again, part of that is Milroe playing, holding onto the ball, trying to make plays out of nothing. Maybe that improves, but like 49 sacks, 49 sacks. Only so much you could do there, even if you do improve. I have my concerns. And then you look at the defense side of the ball, there's not a Turner, there's not an Anderson. The secondary loses
everything, dude.
Between Arnold, McKinstry, between everybody that was drafted last year, this defense takes a significant step back, in my opinion. And again, you also lose one of the best defensive minds in football history in Nick Saban.
Right.
All due respect to Kane Womack and Mo Lindquist, but there's going to be a drop off in coaching on that side of the ball as well. So I know that I understand why the win total is where it is and the talent is still on the roster. This just seems like a really tough sell to say, yeah, Alabama's winning 10 games and they're going to be in the mix. I just feel like there's a lot of downside outcomes where like this could quickly become like 8-4, closer to like 10-2. What do you think? Am I a little too negative on them?
So what I struggle with is like, they did lose stuff on both sides of the ball. Like they lost some key depth. They got Keon Keeley. Like they do have some guys that they're going to trot out that were 5-star style recruits, right? The secondary production is really the big red flag for me, though. It's just like Malachi Moore was the weak link in that secondary last year, which is relative to all the really good players he was around, but he still was kind of the lesser player. But like you're relying on Damani Jackson to come over from USC, who played 668 snaps there last year and like wasn't that good. You got Keon Sabb coming from Michigan, who was a highly recruited kid, but has never been a starter. And then you're pairing those two with Malachi Moore, and I guess the rest is like a youth movement. I think it could be rocky to start. I think they'll probably get better as the year goes on. But I just don't know if like you can have that kind of stuff going on in the secondary where I think there's going to be a lot of like big plays given up and probably a high amount of variance in terms of when those happen. And then like you got Jalen Milroe over here on the offensive side of the ball. And I think, not to be an asshole, sorry, but like
you could curse
with Milroe, it's just, I look at it and it's like the plan for Milroe, honestly, is like, let's get off script. Let's get off plan and hope he makes a big play out of sort of a, spontaneous situation. And it's just like, that is not a plan, like no plan isn't the plan. Yeah. So I did vote them second at SEC Media Days, just kind of out of like, I don't know, comfort and tradition and the idea of like what Saban has built there. But Yeah, like I could see them losing at Tennessee. I could see Wisconsin giving them a game at least. I could see Missouri beating them. I could see LSU beating them. Obviously, I could see Georgia beating them. Like I could, 8-4 seems a little steep to me, but I could see 9-3.
Yeah.
And I also though like if things work out in Milrow, if DeBoer is that guy, then I see a world where they go 11-1 and they're a 6 seed or 5 seed or something in a playoff, and then who knows what happens once you get into a tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the talent's definitely on hand, but you mentioned, I mean, at Wisconsin, Georgia, at Tennessee, then the week after you host Missouri. You come out of bye, but you go to LSU. I'm personally, I like Oklahoma. I think that there's talent on hand. You go to Oklahoma, and then there's obviously the Iron Bowl, which is in Tuscaloosa this year. I just feel it's up against it to get like that high end outcome. You know what I mean? Like to get like to 10, 11 wins. There's just a lot of really challenging games. And we mentioned the secondary. You got Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri, LSU, even. I mean, that's 4 of the top
I mean,
10,
even going to Oklahoma with
top 10, 15 passing offense in the country.
Jackson Arnold playing, I mean, he'll have started 10 games already at that point in the season. Like, I bet he'll be pretty comfortable in what they're trying to do. Yeah. No, it is a massive problem. And I think it's kind of hilarious because nobody's really talking about it just because I think we're all so used to Alabama being there. I think the goal for Alabama should be let's try and survive enough to make the playoff and hope by that point in the season we've kind of figured some things out and gotten some experience into the right guys. But yeah, I think people have also just severely underestimated how freaking good at this Nick Saban was. Like we're talking about the greatest coach ever. We're talking about a guy who could take what they were in that Texas game and turn them into a playoff team by the end of the year. Kalen DeBoer is a good coach, but nobody's Nick Saban.
This is also like a huge, again, respect to Kalen DeBoer, but like this is a huge jump in expectation. Like trying to rebuild Washington, the Pac-12, is a lot different than going like filling into Nick Saban's office. It's a little bit different. You know what I mean?
Totally, 100%. And I mean, the other thing that I'll say, the one thing that gives me kind of some potential like this could work out is that you look at DeBoer's roster in the national championship game last year. There wasn't a single player who played 10 snaps in that game that he recruited out of high school. Mm-hmm. A lot of the players that ended up really being the core of that Washington team outside of Penix and one of the wide receivers that transferred in were Chris Peterson recruits that were in their 5th year or took a COVID year to get to a 6th year. Okay, so like maybe he comes in and can do some similar things with the upperclassmen at Alabama, but the difference between an Alabama and a Washington, honestly, is that the upperclassmen that are really good at a place like Bama or Georgia or some of these NFL factory programs, they're gone. They're in the NFL. It's like you don't have guys stick around for 5 years often at a place like Bama who are also NFL players just because usually they get theirs early.
Yeah. Team that kind of wants to get in on Alabama's real estate at the top of the SEC is Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. Win total 9.5, 6-1 to win the conference. Sure, they lose Quinshon Judkins, and they still manage to be top 10 in returning production on offense. They bring back Jackson Dart, Ulysses Bentley, who I've been high on since he transferred in. He's still there as well, and there's some depth coming in behind him as well. The offense returns Trey Harris. They get Wells from South Carolina, who I think has a lot of upside, but his season was cut short last year after injury.
Sure.
Kreese Scorin's a loaded tight end. So this offense, I don't think there's much to say, right? This is going to be a top 10 offense in the country, just like last year. I think it should be business as usual for Lane and Jackson Dart. The defense, pretty solid under Pete going last year. They were 38th in EPA per pass. They were hyper aggressive at getting in the backfield. Really trying to keep filling up, with the portal, trying to really load up as much talent as possible and hoping it clicks. I think this team is pretty accurately priced. I think they're going to be really good. I think the question is like, is Lane a good coach or is he a great coach? I feel like this is a gut check for Ole Miss where can they take a step into like the serious football style? You know what I mean? Like Sure, they made a New Year's Six last year. They were really good. They won 10 regular season games last year, 100%. But like, they were never serious. Like to me, like
Totally.
for
Yeah.
be
I mean,
for
the
a schedule
serious
team
game
to
they
be
had
like a
was,
serious football team.
yeah. I mean, they played two serious teams. That was one of them was Alabama. They scored 10 points. The other was Georgia. They got beat 52-17.
Yeah,
And that is, I think that's really well said. I would, what I struggled with, because I mean, I had to sit down and do the whole preseason all SEC ballot
Mm.
while I was in Dallas. And so I was really like digging into some of these rosters. And it's like, I mean, you go through the first 22 of LSU, or I'm sorry, of Ole Miss's team, and it's like, there are some dudes for sure. It's just, I don't know what comes after that, right? Like,
Yeah.
you get into the third quarter against some of the teams that they're going to play, and they're going to trot out another wave of, 4 and 5 star defensive linemen, and Ole Miss is not.
Yeah.
In some ways, they kind of remind me of the SEC version of 2023 Florida State, where it's like they haven't recruited at an elite level, but they've sort of found pieces from the portal, and there's kind of this perfect storm of timing that's happening in terms of those guys where they are in their career with eligibility. I am not as big on Jackson Dart as everyone else, I guess. I think he's very similar to Milroe in a lot of ways, truthfully. I think he is he's either throwing a slant or he's throwing a bomb or he's running. And I think that can be stopped.
Yeah.
The variable is this new helmet microphone system and having Lane on the headset. Like, I think that can, I don't know what that does to them yet, honestly, but
So that was gonna be something I brought up in terms of like audibles, even like with the tablets, like scheming up as the game progresses. You get later in the game, you have the tablets right there. You're able to kind of work a little bit more. You see, obviously, the all 22, and you kind of see the field. Like I think, like that's a really big edge to someone like Lane, like the really high end, X's and O's tacticians on the field. I think that's where you can maybe see Ole Miss make up some of their deficiencies. But I agree with you in terms of like how serious does this team get? Because while a team returns a lot of production, it's also like it's the same, if that makes sense. Like how high is the ceiling of those guys, or did they max out last year?
yeah, I think that is. I mean, that's kind of my question. Like, it's just with all like, are they still really good enough on the offensive line? Is kind of my thought, because like I saw that offensive line in Athens and they had a rough night, and I'm just not positive that the bringing in a kid from UNC and like, can you sort of piecemeal an offensive line through the portal and compete against the top third, top quarter of the SEC every week? I
Yeah,
don't know. I think that on defense, like in a weird way, I know they got Walter Nolan and all of that, but it's like I like their back end a little more than I realized before I kind of dug into them to do preseason stuff. Like I think they have a good safety tandem and all that, so maybe that keeps them from getting into all these shootout style games. But I just personally am gonna like stand firm on the idea of you can build a 9 or 10 win team out of the portal, but you can't build like an SEC champion by recruiting 14th in the league for 3 years and then going and signing like 26 dudes out of the portal over a couple of years span. I just don't think it can.
I agree, and I think that the Florida State comp is a pretty solid one. But again, the difference is ACC, a down ACC last year versus probably the most talented conference we'll ever see until next year. But you know what I mean, like going into
Yeah.
this year. So the schedule, though, I will say, like I do think playoffs is in the realm of possibility. I think they will be like on the what every Tuesday night where they do the studio show, the selection, the ranking show. Like Ole Miss
Sure.
will be in the mix of that. I think just given their schedule, they host Kentucky, they go to South Carolina, LSU. I think both those are gettable. They host Oklahoma. At least they host Georgia this year,
Right.
and they go to Florida. So like the schedule isn't super difficult relative to like in Alabama. That's why I think like I could see playoff, but in terms of like can they really beat Georgia? Can they, go to the semifinals of a college football playoff? That's where I run into some concern.
No, sure. And I mean, Ole Miss being Ole Miss, though, at the same time, it's like I could see them beating any team on their schedule.
Yeah.
I also could see them losing to South Carolina and Columbia. Like, it's just I just got to see it, man.
I think it makes
total
sense.
I remember Ole Miss being preseason number 6, like back the year, after Houston Nutt's first year, and then losing in their Thursday night opener at South Carolina. Like,
yeah,
it's just Ole Miss football, and it's still going to be Ole Miss football until somebody shows me it's not.
Yeah, I mean, what about LSU? Because I think you could make an argument like you could quickly find Ole Miss teetering into like LSU territory from last year, because this is a team I was relatively high on going into last year, and I wouldn't say it whiffs because they ended up winning 9 games and still going under their win total.
Offense was crazy.
Yeah. Offense was so good. The defense, 120th in EPA per play. They allowed nearly 3 points per drive. They bring in Blake Baker from Missouri, who was fantastic, and maybe that helps. But
I still don't know about that secondary.
Yeah, depth is a big concern here. And then, I would say maybe the defense gets a little bit better because it can't get worse, so it has to get better. But the offense is going to take a step back. They, true freshman center playing on starting. I like Garrett Nussmeier. I think he's pretty good, but I think it's pretty obvious to say there will be at least some sort of drop off.
Sure.
I mean, wide receiver, you lose 2 NFL players. You got Lacey back, but you lose, top 10, 2 first rounders. So you lose Mike Danbrook to Notre Dame. So there's a lot going on here for LSU. Still, though, there's a lofty expectation, 9.5 win total, 10-1 to win the conference. I don't really know how to treat this team because they were so polarizing on both sides of the ball. How do you see it?
They are like my biggest mystery kind of situation. What'd you say their win total was again?
9.5.
Man, that honestly surprises me a little bit. I mean, I just feel like, they got all those DBs like off the street last year. You know what I mean? And I still am not sure what that secondary is going to look like. I would swing under here.
I will say though, it's more like 9. It's like it's minus 170, so it's like a juice way. It's really, call it more like 9 than 9.5.
Yeah, I mean, my honest opinion on LSU is just the loss of the wide receivers and the loss of Jaden Daniels. I think Garrett Nussmeier is going to be a good quarterback. I think he's a good player. I don't think I think there will be some inconsistency at times. So it's like, I think they lose. I think they'll still be a good offense, but they're not going to be, crazy record-setting offense that they were in 2023. And I just don't think the defense takes that big of a step forward. I think they'll be better, but I don't think they'll be remarkably better to where you see them. I could see them, getting to November and being in that playoff conversation before. Like that Alabama game just feels like the big swing there. It's like whoever wins or loses that game is probably not going to the playoff or going to the playoff based on what happened.
Yeah, it's like a loser leaves town type matchup. Yeah, it's a team where I really don't know, and it's tough to have a strong opinion because I'm not super high on USC, but I wouldn't be shocked if like LSU kind of did what they did last year against FSU and just like kind of get rolled by a non-con opponent, like in that prime time spot. Like I could definitely see that. But again, like you host Ole Miss, you go to Texas A&M, home Bama, home Oklahoma. The draw sets up nicer than other ones, I would say, given LSU what their schedule is. But the defense just gives me a lot of concern. I mean, again, it can't get worse. They get Paz from Wisconsin, Harold Perkins, down year last year. They really didn't know what to do with him. I read a quote, was it last week, that they finally have locked him in on his position and they think he could kind of get back to where he was seen as like was the buzzy going into last year, like the buzzy defensive player that can win Heisman going into preseason, and completely fell flat on his face. But there's so much talent that they can probably get away with a few wins and like just like steal ones that they probably should lose. But it's tough to get too excited about them as like a contender. I would put them like in a tier below Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss has a higher floor, I think, than LSU.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's just so many questions. And, I would take Ole Miss's starting 22
Yeah.
over LSU's without really any sort of question.
Yeah. And because now like we're in the Brian Kelly era and this is quickly going and like any weird vibes there or anything, or you like it's probably
I
too early for hot seat with the contract he signed.
Yeah, well, it's not just the contract. I think their high school recruiting is going well enough to where
Yeah.
people, there's stuff to sell for the future. The thing about it is like they did fire Matt House, the defensive coordinator, after last year, and they fired all of the assistants on that defensive staff as well. Like if you look at big SEC jobs, you normally get to make one coordinator change.
Yeah.
You don't normally get to fire your whole defensive staff or offensive staff twice.
Yeah.
So I think they got to improve on the defensive side of the ball. The thing that was interesting to me was how they didn't take, they were in the recruitment of a couple big transfer defensive tackles who were in the portal in the spring. And it seemed like, that is the biggest need maybe of all on their defense is some interior alignment. And, they didn't get those guys. And Kelly comes out talking about, we're not going to be an NIL first program and all of that. But I see them spending NIL at the high school level. I know that's different because it's kind of cash now versus cash later. But still, I wonder at times, did they just not look at their roster and say, like, hey, we're a defensive tackle away from competing for the SEC or, having a shot to make a deep playoff run? It feels like if they were one position away from, being legit, then LSU would have found the dollars to get that done.
And I would just offensive line, if injuries come up, that position group, I think, can get a little dicey. Just the amount of inexperience. There's talent, obviously, there. It's LSU, but just inexperience, I think. Just keep an eye on that as the season goes on. I have that marked as well. So, I feel like I've kind of been like kind of talking down on a bunch of the teams so far, but now this is a team I'm firmly in on.
All right.
Tennessee.
Okay. All right. Go on.
Okay.
I'm listening.
So 22, they're in the college football playoff discussion. Things go off the rails against South Carolina. Hooker gets hurt. It's a disaster. They allow like 75 points. Spencer Rattler, dream game. Last year, I was off on them. Joe Milton, he's terrible. I didn't see it at all. But the defense ended up putting together like a top 20 unit pretty much, which was not really what we've become accustomed to with Tennessee, especially with that high tempoed offense kind of puts the defense in a tough spot. Now it's Nico time. I got to work myself into saying the last name. We're going to stick with Nico for tonight.
I am Alieva.
I'm not even going to bother. But so we got Nico. I love what they did in the portal, getting Brazel from Tulane. They got some depth there with Webb and Thornton. Sure, they need to place right and small at running back, but there's talent there. I think they could offset that. And to me, it's really about Nico and the returning 5 offensive linemen starters from last year. The defense brings Pierce back. That he's going to be top 5, top 10 pick in the draft. Like I think this team is going to look a lot more like the team from 2 years ago than it is last year. And I really think like there's Heisman upside for Nico. I think there's SEC championship game appearance upside for Tennessee.
Whoa.
Yeah, I think to me, ceiling goes higher than I'm looking at my sheet here of who we've spoken about so far. I think ceiling goes higher than definitely LSU, Ole Miss. And yeah, I think ceiling could go higher than Bama.
I don't know about that. I mean, look, recruiting matters, I guess, is the reason I would say that about the Tennessee comparison. But what's interesting about Heupel, well, there's a lot that's interesting here. So, first of all, I will give him credit because he realized early after that Florida debacle when they got blown out on the road in Gainesville, he kind of realized like Joe Milton should not be throwing the ball into the middle of the field. So we are going to just throw the ball down the boundaries. We're going to run the football and we're going to not turn the ball over and we're going to play defense. And, even with kind of a handicap of sorts at quarterback last year, they still won 9 games,
Yeah.
which is good, like on the fly problem solving by Tennessee. Tim Banks is a really good defensive coordinator. Um, that front seven is legit with Pierce. I mean, you mentioned Pierce. They returned their top 5 defensive tackles. Like
Yeah.
that is a ton of continuity. Secondary is being totally rebuilt, and that's
That's
just got
that's the red flag, I would say. That's the position that is you're like, that could be
if
the Achilles
that
heel.
yeah, it can. Also, I will agree with you in the sense of like if that hits though, and I think their corners could be pretty decent. I don't think their safeties are going to be very good. That's just my current read on things. But I am I'm very interested in the whole Nico experience because uh, coming into last year, we heard about how good Joe Milton was going to be and how talented he is. And it's like, oh, look how big he is. Look how strong his arm is. Nico fits a lot of those same characteristics. I think he'll be better than Joe Milton with for certain. But I'm also just kind of like, all right, let's see. Let's see because as good as Hendon Hooker was in 2022, like you got down to the Georgia game and it came down to as simple as if you can take away slants on first and second down and cover his first read, then things will break down and you can get
Mhm.
pressure and everything will sort of fall apart for them. Now, that would, I'm not saying that's like, obviously they had a great year in 2022. I'm just curious about kind of how things will look for them offensively when all of this shakes out. And I think that it is a little bit of like a boom. There is that ceiling you're talking about where it's like, yeah, if things fall in place, it could be really good. But it could also go south in a
Yeah.
way. Like I could see them losing to NC State and Charlotte in week 2. Like that is not outside the realm of possibility for me. They got to go to Oklahoma for Nico's first ever SEC start. I think it's Oklahoma's first ever SEC game.
I
That
believe
will
so.
be, you know, that will be a crazy environment. Um, I think Nico's super talented. I just am curious, like, does he have that it vector about him? As a first year starter, is that mental toughness going to be there? Or does that kind of have to be built through scar tissue?
Very possible. I will say, just the other side of the coin, though, helps he
Sure.
got a year in the system, though, before even touching
Totally.
the field. Like that, I think that I'm in favor of that as opposed to just like throwing out a true freshman. I think that that will benefit him. And he played Iowa last year in the bowl game. I know it's a bowl game, wasn't his best, but I think Iowa, even though it's not SEC defense, it's one of the best in the country, and he still did all right there. I think secondary is a concern. I do think it helps a stout pass rush could maybe mask a little bit of a deficient secondary with good pressure.
Mhm.
So I think maybe that's part of the equation. I agree. Going to Oklahoma, I I think Tennessee might have a little too much firepower for NC State. I know it's on neutral in Raleigh, but
Sure.
they might have like a little too much like SEC firepower for NC State.
Yeah, I agree.
At Oklahoma, obviously a tricky one. You host Bama, that's never an easy one. But like there is a world, a non-zero chance. We're talking week 12. They're going to Sanford Stadium, Tennessee, Georgia, 2 undefeated teams, SEC title game. Like it is possible.
I mean, look, it would be great for my business. So I'd love to see it. There is a world where that's possible, no doubt. Yeah, I think with Tennessee, it's as simple as this, right? If you can defend the run with a light box, then you can stop them on defense.
Mhm.
And I guess the question is going to be, kind of going down that schedule and seeing who can do that. And NC State kind of always has like sneaky studs on the defensive line.
Yeah.
So that's why I made the comment about them. But um, I don't really know exactly what to make of them, to be 100% with you, until
Mhm.
we see Nico play a couple games and until we see that secondary. But there's certainly with that, that offensive system is kind of fascinating because when it works beautifully.
Yeah.
But when it's not working, Heupel doesn't really have like a solve
Yeah.
for that. And I'm curious to see, does Nico's athleticism will he let Nico kind of play off script some, or is it just going to be, this is our system, you're locked into the rules of it? Because I thought that really hurt Hendon Hooker at times, honestly, in 2022, and kind of, really probably cost them a chance to be competitive in that Georgia game, just because it was like the uh the principle of that offense is like, it is better to not take a risk than it is to turn the ball over. And there are times where you just got to start taking risks to stay in big games.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the ceiling with this team is tantalizing. I think there's a lot to like, I think. And listen, I think that the concern, especially the adjustments mid game when things aren't working, very, very fair. I think things break their way schedule wise. And if Nico hits, then I think they're really onto something. Possibly more than like the LSU's of the conference or something like that, I think. Another team, I'm curious where you stand. I've seen polarizing opinions on both, but A&M,
I'm
first
high
year,
on A&M.
you're high on
Yeah.
A&M. I see it at least. I like what they did. I mean, I think Colin Klein is one of the premier offensive coordinators in the country. And you look at what he did with, let's call it what, average talent at Kansas State. I don't want to sound like Kansas State stinks because they don't, but you know what like
Sure.
not SEC NIL serious talent. And that's what A&M still has, even though they're transitioning out of the Jimbo era. Connor Wegman, in a relatively small sample, has looked apart, in my opinion. Gets hurt. Maybe that's something that he can't seem to stay on the field, but we'll see. Wide receiver room should be pretty loaded between Moose Muhammad, Noah Thomas, Barber, the Troy transfer. I love Cyrus Allen from Louisiana Tech. I think he could be a interesting, even a screen slot underneath type player. Running backs, all three starters back. EJ Smith comes in from Stanford. They hit the portal hard for tight ends, which is really a staple of the Klein system. Offensive line coach Elko brought over the Duke offensive line coach, which I think he did a great job rebuilding that Duke front. So I imagine what he could do with some real talent. I think this offense is a pretty high floor. Defense wasn't an issue. They were top 20 in EPA per play last season. So where does this go wrong for A&M, right? Like I just talked them all up. Like is it
Right.
Wegman can't stay healthy? Like what's the rub here with A&M?
It could be that. I could see, I still have some questions about kind of what the interior of that offensive line is going to look like. I also am not, I'm not totally sold on, like, I think Wegman's good. It's just, what's the explosiveness look like on
Mhm.
offense? There's a lot of, they're relying a lot, I think, on certain transfer pieces hitting. And like we've seen that go well at times in certain places. We've also, I remember all of the hype at Penn State for the kid that transferred from Kent State who never did anything.
Oh,
Right.
Cephas.
Yeah, exactly. There's always guys like that. Like
Mhm.
A&M goes and gets Scourton from Purdue. He led the Big Ten in sacks. That seems a lot more sustainable than a MAC player coming up, right? But
Yeah, I
point
agree.
being,
Scout, I think he's a player, especially doing that at Purdue is
it's
impressive in
not
my opinion.
easy. Yeah, for sure. I think my big reason for being high on them, honestly, was uh I was just extremely impressed by Mike Elko at SEC Media Days. Like the vibe that he brings is so different than anything I've really seen with A&M in my time around college football. Like it's kind of, we're gonna work and we're gonna speak softly and we're not gonna pound our chests and do all this look at me shit that program's kind of done for 20 years.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's kind of like we're gonna under promise and over deliver. And there's just, I know this is not great analysis by any means, but like the vibes are just, they're just there with me, or for A&M with me, man. Like they are there, even being around their players. Like it's just, something has happened there that I think they have kind of bonded in. And I think that 2020 season that they had where they did, you know, look competitive. Like I think a lot of that was Elko's influence anyways. Uh, I could see this working out where take some of those old elite recruits that stayed and believed. You put some of these portal players into the pot, and you get playoff stew in Aggie land in year one under Mike Elko.
So in the regular season last year, sounds pretty surprising, but they not a lot of one-score games, but when they did, they lost all of them. They were 0-3 in one-score games last year. If you go back to last year, I mean, they went 7-6. They had a post-game win expectancy of 8.5, so they underachieved a little bit relative to really how they played. I mean, again, I think the defense is gonna be pretty nasty, especially in the secondary. Bryce Anderson was a stud last year. He really pops when you watch their games. And then they get Jaden Hill from Florida, who did nothing but produce on a pretty middling secondary last year. So I do see like the A&M upside. I'm a believer in them. So I'm taking you. Do you have a strong opinion about that first game? Because I think I've done 2 radio hits on college football already, and I've been asked both times. Okay, so we got like Notre Dame, A&M, first game. Big. I believe it's prime time. A lot of new faces there with all the turnover. Do you like have a strong opinion on that game before like we kind of get into the rest of the schedule?
I lean A&M on talent, on home field advantage. I think that look, like we haven't really seen Notre Dame be great offensively against like SEC defenses in recent years. I think that game's all going to come down to like how quickly has A&M's interior line kind of gelled, because I think their tackles are good, and I think if they can get just average guard and center play, that they can protect Wegman and they can have themselves a nice win to start the season. But man, it's definitely hard to say sitting here in July without a little more context from fall camps and all that. But that does feel like a swing game of sorts because,
For sure.
I think like you look at the rest of that schedule, Missouri and A&M feel like sort of they're battling for the same real estate in the SEC right now. And I think that's kind of the other swing game for A&M in 2024, other than Notre Dame, of course.
You could argue the 4 toughest games on their schedule come in College Station. The Notre Dame game, Missouri, LSU, and Texas. You could argue like their season will be defined on their home field. You could almost make that argument. If they do well on the home field, they're probably going to end up in the fringes at least of like the college football playoff conversation, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like if they go, that's the tough thing. We opened the show on this note, obviously, about like how's the playoff going to treat the SEC, but it's like, could they go 9-3, but do it while beating Texas the last game of the year, and like that final impression kind of pushes them into that 11th or 10th spot, or not? I don't know. But I do think like they should, they should beat Florida. They really should beat everybody on that SEC schedule. I mean, Auburn, I don't know what to think of Auburn, honestly.
Neither do I.
There's definitely upside potential there.
Yeah.
It's also Texas A&M though. So, I mean, it's like kind of like betting on a black star or something.
Yeah. It feels like that first game, it has a lot of say in how the year is going to go, right? Like if they lose, then you go like way out the other way, or if they win, it's kind of the leap, the stepping stone for like a massive year or something like that. It does feel like it has that kind of weight on the team. So look, I like Wegman. I know it hasn't been that much of a sample, but I thought I was pretty high on him going into last year. I thought he is talented. I like the way he plays the game, and I think getting Colin Klein is a huge get as well. So look, I think there's rightful optimism around A&M and what they're ceiling. And we mentioned Missouri. That was the next team up. You called it last year. You said you thought that Missouri was the big jump team out of the SEC last year. And I mean, Cook's back, Burden's back. Well, Schrader's not back, so they don't hit the Triple Crown. But I think they did a pretty good job replacing him with 2 G5 transfers in Nate Noel from App State and Carroll from Georgia State. they combined for 2,100 yards on the ground last year. So I think run game should be fine, if not amazing like last year. The passing game should be pretty strong again, though, with Burden, also Weiss and Cooper there. I would say question marks on the offensive line. They were
Yeah.
101st in line yards. And the defense, we just mentioned them before, but they need to replace their defense coordinator, who's now at LSU. They went and got Corey Batoon from South Alabama. The schedule's really easy, but I do have a few like underlying concerns about Missouri. Not that they're going to be bad or something, they're going to drop back, but they might not take advantage of the easy schedule they have. Like this to me feels like this is Drink's real chance to get into the playoff and really establish Missouri. I'm a little concerned that maybe they fall a little short of that.
Yeah, I agree. I look at Missouri and I think Drinkwitz is doing a great job. Like I think they are, very good. The problem is like, dude, they just had the most draft picks in the history of the program taken by the NFL. And this isn't a Georgia or an Alabama or an Ohio State or somewhere that like recruits, top 5, even top 10, even top 25 level classes year in and year out.
Mm-hmm.
Recruiting has gotten better there, and they're doing some very innovative things with NIL. There is 5-star star power with Burden. Williams Neri comes in. That kid's a friggin' freak, dude. I covered him as a recruit. Like, he is going to be a monster as a pass rusher in the SEC at some point in his career. At the end of the day, though, I really struggle with the idea that, like, I think people look at football the wrong way often, right? Like, too many fans and unfortunately too many media members as well look at football and they're like, Brady Cook's back, Luther Burden's back. I know both their names. That means Missouri's going to be really good. And it's like, well, Javon Foster was protecting Brady Cook's blind side last year. He's an NFL player, and Cook still got sacked like 24 times, right? So that is a concern for me, as is losing, I thought, the best boundary corner pair in the SEC is what they had last year with Abrams Drain and Rakestraw. They lose Hopper, who was a great linebacker. They lose Robinson out of the secondary. Like, they lose like 5, I thought, like high to elite level defenders, and they're Missouri. They're not trouting a 5-star safety out that's going to replace that. So I think the offense will be good. I think people are underrating the loss of Schrader just because he was a unique scheme fit for the stretch zone stuff that Drinkwitz likes to do. I am going to I don't think they're cratering out at 6-6 or anything, but like, you go down that schedule, Auburn blue chip ratio team, Alabama blue chip ratio team, Oklahoma blue chip ratio team. Like, there are A&M blue chip ratio team. Like, so that's a third of the schedule that, like, I think you can reasonably say they got more talent. Now, is that talent more organized? Is it more ready to win? I don't know, but I got Mizzou on the outside looking in when it comes playoff time. I think 8-4, 9-3 is going to be where they are, but I don't think 9-3 gets it done for them with the weak schedule that they've got.
Yeah, the schedule definitely gives them the opportunity. Like, if they do cash in, this is the schedule to do it, I think, for a team like Missouri. Roadies at A&M, Bama, that's kind of it for the road. But again, it's like, where does the talent really shake out? I will mention the A&M game. It's a unique setup, I guess, in favor of Missouri, but they get a bye. A&M's playing their 6th straight game. It's in College Station, just like one of those rest setups that helps Missouri. You mentioned the secondary. I had questions at linebacker. Nobody back with more than 40 tackles from last season on what was a damn good defense. And Schrader, again, I think Noel and Carroll are both very good. Again, G5 talent, so maybe it doesn't translate, but Schrader did mask some offensive line issues. I mentioned before, but 101st in line yards, and they allowed a handful of tackles for loss and sacks. So it's not like the offensive line was really like overpowering.
Right.
It was a lot of scheme and Schrader dependent, which when you see a little bit of a drop off, that might end up meaning something. So I think it's fair to question the offensive line as well. If like there's something that goes wrong with this offense, maybe it's that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, the flip side is like the receivers are going to be nasty. I mean,
Yeah.
they might have the best receiving core in the league, really. Uh, I'm also just like, the stat I kind of dropped earlier about Brady Cook getting sacked as much as he did last year, even with Foster, it heightens the concerns I have about the point you just made on the OL. And I'm also in a spot with Mizzou where, uh, are we sure Brady Cook's that guy? Like, I mean, like, I think he's a nice player. I think
He's a Jag.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a Jag plus, but like, he's definitely not, you know, it's just, you give that receiving core to somebody else, and I could see a world where it's like, well, doesn't really matter because they can go win games and shootouts and all of that. It's like Brady Cook, I don't think is, unless you're talking about a defense as bad as like 2023 LSU, it's just, I don't see you going out and scoring 40 or 38 week in, week out with Brady Cook under center.
Yeah, I completely agree. OU, I mentioned before, I am high on OU. I like the
Oh,
talent
all
there.
right. Okay.
But I don't know if it's going to happen this year. This might be a team that like I'm higher on like in like a game to game scenario than I am necessarily that like they're going to make a run in the SEC or something. I think they got hosed in the schedule,
Mhm.
but I mean between Jackson Arnold, I'm a Big Ten guy, so I've seen plenty of Deion Burks. That guy is league for sure. That is a someone to watch. So I think that connection could work. Sure, I guess Jeff Lebby leaves, but I think Seth Luttrell could call that offense. I'm
Yeah.
not super concerned there. I think the defense, Venables, no surprise with top 20 in EPA per play last season. And I really like their hire of Zach Alley from Jacksonville State. Really, really hyper aggressive. I think this defense honestly could even take a jump. I don't know how much of a jump they could take, but I think they could be even better next year. They're 40th in returning production. So while schedule does no favors, I do like Oklahoma, and I think Jackson Arnold is a pretty unique talent. I'm excited to watch him play, especially against like a high level schedule. So I like OU. It seems like you're on the other end of this one.
Uh, I think the SEC is a line of scrimmage league and always has been. And the teams that I've seen, like, look, Missouri caught us all off guard when they came in and, won the East in their first year, or not in their first year, but in their second year in the league in 2013. Did it again in 2014. What did they do that behind? They did it behind like a veteran laden offensive line that, came in and had hundreds of combined starts when they started making that run. Oklahoma's got to replace all 5 offensive line starters.
Yeah.
And they kind of got like welcome to the SEC, like pushed in a locker a little bit when they lost the tackle, Caden Green, who was a 5-star tackle, transfers out to Missouri from Oklahoma after earning a starting job at Oklahoma. Like, that's, you're in a different universe now, I guess is my point here. And so uh, I think Arnold's good. I think there's firepower at skill positions. I think the defense is probably a little better than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
I tend to defer to Brent Venables when it's like, if I'm on the fence, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I just think that offensive line is going to get pushed in and pushed around by like Tennessee. I think we'll see. I know that like I could see Tennessee, Oklahoma going either way. It's just, that's a game that concerns me. Texas, ironically enough, I think Oklahoma will beat Texas because I think that Texas's defensive line is going to be kind of dog shit, to be truthful. But like even South Carolina returns a sneaky amount of defensive line front 7 production. I could see a scenario where they get into a game with Oklahoma. I think Ole Miss is better. Missouri, Oklahoma, like we were just talking about, I think that's going to be like the swing game for both programs.
Yeah.
But closing the season out with Alabama and at LSU is like it's a real kind of like FU to Oklahoma coming into the league, with considering the schedule their rivals down in Austin got.
Yeah, that's why I like the team, and then you look at the schedule, you're like, well, not much you could really like. It's one of those where a team gets screwed by their schedule. I mean, again, I think Arnold's talented. I like the defense a lot. Offensive line, yeah, I mean, relying on a ton of transfer talent. it feels like to me though, like I'm more confident that Oklahoma can maybe come out of the season like successfully relative
Mhm.
to Texas, if that makes sense. Is that like a bet? You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like Texas is more likely to underachieve than Oklahoma is. I like what's on hand here a little bit more, and I think that maybe it's dumbed down enough that they could still come out ahead with a decent start to the SEC.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm on board for that.
Yeah,
I certainly think that's possible.
yeah. So Auburn, it's funny now that we get like the middle bottom, we start to like we've already kind of like talked around some of the teams already.
Sure.
So Auburn last year, first year of Hugh Freeze, offense was pretty brutal,
Yes.
below the national average in EPA per play. That's not schedule adjusted. The offensive line, not great, but the run game was solid. But Peyton Thorne really limited their options on what they could do on offense. Defense was solid. They played a lot of freshmen, so I think that there's some like talent coming up the pipe that they can maybe improve. They're top 20 in returning production, and Hugh Freeze is calling the play, so maybe there's like some untapped potential here. But I don't know. I can't help but be down on this team, just given the ceiling that Peyton Thorne gives them. Like I'm a little surprised that Auburn didn't like be a little bit more aggressive in the portal. What was it? Cam Ward they were in on?
Yeah, among others.
Yeah. I'm surprised they really
DJ,
didn't make a push though, just given how poor Peyton Thorne was. I mean, this Auburn offense finished the year.
I think, you know, I think what they decided honestly is that we're probably not a quarterback away
Oh,
from competing.
113th in EPA per pass, by the way, last year. Like it was terrible.
124th in pass yards a game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it's all they're 90th or worse in every passing category. There is some hype around the Auburn people that I know that something kind of clicked into place with the RPO system that Freeze wants to run for Thorne this year, to where they at least trust him to make the right reads,
Mhm.
right? I think it'll be interesting to see, you know, Jarquez Hunter, Brian Betty, like they have good running backs. I would put their running back room up against any's in the league. The kid
And
they
Hunter
recruited,
ran for 1,000 yards last year. So I mean,
yeah,
that's all they could do.
yeah, and I mean the kids that they brought in at wide receiver, man, like Cam Coleman
Yep.
is a freak. Like he's going to be good. I do think Auburn is going to kind of be one of these sneaky good teams because their defense. I know they got gashed by New Mexico State and all that at the end of the year. I just don't think they gave a shit by that point, really. But like DJ Durkin, terrible human being, good defensive coordinator, right? So I mean, we've got him coming in. I think they have some pieces. Do I think they have like playoff upside potential or anything like that? No, but I do see a universe where they come into Athens 5-0 on October
Yeah.
5th. Like
Host their first five. I mean, pretty solid, start there. A little runway, you could figure things out.
yeah, I mean, like I guess the question I would ask is like, could they beat Missouri? Like, yeah.
On the road,
Is it possible though? Like,
yeah.
is it, is it a 50-50 thing? No, but like I don't think it's an 80-20 thing
No,
either,
no,
right?
no, no.
You know. So yeah, I mean, similar to Oklahoma, they do close out that season like that Texas A&M game that they get at home. That could be a very deterministic sort of moment for them.
Mhm.
It's just going to be interesting for Freeze because like if they start 5-0, it's just going to kind of put more pressure on the back half, right? Like
Yeah.
because there's going to be some excitement and some hope, and then of Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky, A&M, Alabama, those 5 games, like, can they win 2?
And the win total is 7.5, shaded towards the under. So like the expectation is 7.
Yeah,
So I
that's what
think
I've got them at right there.
that's the path, right? Like start 5-0 and try and like maneuver a few more wins out there out of a pretty, tricky schedule outside of obviously Vandy and ULM, but
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Honestly, is I mean, they start 5-0 and they beat Vandy and UNLM. That puts them at 7. So can they beat one of Mizzou, Kentucky, uh, A&M, Bama?
Yeah, that's like their path to having a strong year, I would say.
I could see them beating Kentucky.
Well, we're talking about 'em next.
All right,
So,
let's do it.
Kentucky, the king of, the middle class, I like to think of, Mark Stoops, in Lexington. Just, like, nice and easy, right? Like 6 and 6, 7
Just
and 6.
still upward mobility for Kentucky.
Just keep it moving. So,
Yeah,
last year, they finished the season on a high note. They beat Louisville, but the the Leary transfer did not work out. They go out and get Brock Vandergriff. You know him, I would say, fairly well from his time in Georgia. How do
sure.
you see that transfer landing with Kentucky?
I am. I'm not sold that it's going to go great. I think it could still be an upgrade over Leary. I don't
Yeah.
think he's going to set the world on fire. I think Vandergriff, still very talented kid physically. I think he's more mobile probably than a lot of people will realize, and he's got a big arm. Like I don't think he's going to be able to do much in terms of like he's not going to be a tight window thrower underneath intermediate. But if you look at Kentucky's offense, you look at what they've done historically with Liam Cohen and all that, who I think did leave this offseason
Yeah.
actually after recruiting Vandergriff, but still, I could see them being successful in a world where they run the football and they just hit play action kind of deep shots around Barry and Brown, Dinky, and then lean on Deion Walker to just be a badass on the other side of the ball and get
Yeah,
to
I'm buying Kentucky this year. I mean, it's relative. Like it's relative. Their win total is 6.5. Like I think over for Kentucky. The schedule is pretty straightforward, but I think Vandegrift. They, I think the receiver room is pretty solid between Brown, who I think is like a future pro. Macklin comes from North Texas. He had 1,000 yards. Dane Key's back. They go and get Troutman from Ohio State, who is a little prodding, but I think he could be a. I'm not sure he's a bell cow, but I think he can offset some of the Ray Davis, some of that loss. And I think the defense, just what's going back there, 11th in returning production, bringing back Walker, Oxidine. They land Dumas Johnson from Georgia in the portal. So I
really good
think,
player. Yeah.
yeah, like I think this team. We get to like this middle bottom area of the SEC. They're not going to contend for the SEC or anything like that, but I do kind of like them, and I think you mentioned like can Auburn win at Kentucky? I kind of like Kentucky this year. I'm a little bit more, I think, looking up on them. Again, they do play Georgia. They do go to Ole Miss. They do go to Tennessee and Texas. But after that, I think that they have more upside than some of the teams on their schedule.
No, they do. And I mean, I think they, honestly, the question for me is like, can they finally beat South Carolina? I mean, they've
Last
lost.
year was a brutal one too. Like Leary, that was like that was towards the end of the season, I think, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And yeah, that was like when it was like, oh, this guy is like completely unsalvageable.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think those are those are the kind of swing games for Kentucky though. Like, they usually lose to somebody they shouldn't, like Vanderbilt or South Carolina or both. They usually beat somebody they shouldn't too. It's like, I don't know. I think it would be hilarious if Kentucky went to Texas and won second to last week of the season. It would be hilarious if they went to Ole Miss and won late September. Like that's all very much, I think, in the realm of possibility for Kentucky that I know and love. So they are high in returning production, as you said. I mean, 76% defense and 68% offense. Like, I think this will be a better team than we've seen probably since 2021, maybe Kentucky. But, do I think that they're going to like be another 10-win Kentucky? That would surprise me.
Yeah. I think it's like definitely 6, to me 7, and then it's like probably not 8. Like I think like 7 wins. I'm confident they could get there. I just think that there's more talent on this team relative to last season, and I think with Vandergrift, like of course not a lot of experience, so there's some more downside risk, but
Sure.
that's talent that, like, I mean, especially given Leary fell flat on his face, like that they haven't really had at the position in a while. So that's why I'm buying what's there at quarterback.
Yeah, I'm with you.
What do you think about South Carolina?
I think South Carolina is they're kind of. I mean, like that was one of the stranger things about SEC media days was just like South Carolina kind of came in like confident and sort of with their chest puffed out a little bit and talking to some of their players. Like I talked to Alex Huntley, one of their defensive linemen, and I was actually the only person over at his table towards the end of his press availability. And I was just like, well, kind of, what's the ceiling for you guys? He's like, we don't have a ceiling. I was like, well, I cover Georgia, right? So like, what do you guys feel about not playing Georgia this year? And he's like, well, it's a good game, and like, I like was looking forward to the chance to hopefully beat them at some point in my career, and I guess we could see him in the playoffs. And I was like, oh, I mean, good luck, dude. If you can dream it, you can do it. All that good stuff, right? I think that South Carolina is probably better than like 13th in the league or whatever they're being predicted, right? Like I could see South Carolina, oh God, I don't know that you go down that schedule and it's just like they still got to play Clemson. They still got to go to Kentucky. They still have Ole Miss. They have Bama. They have Oklahoma. I think this could be the swan song for Shane Beamer, right? But like I think that they are doing everything as a program to like put out this idea of like they've literally said we've had the best offseason ever. Like they literally put a video out and like the head of social media stuff for South Carolina was like, I've never seen a team connect like this in the offseason. It's like, all right, bro, like you make fucking YouTube videos, right? Like, what do you really know? But point being, like they are on the Shane Beamer like propaganda machine.
Yeah.
And it's rolling. And so that to me says you guys either think that you're going to be good, or it says to me like you're relying on vibes to get him one more year after this to try and turn things around. Probably that's the case.
So if there's like actually something of substance that's propelling this team better than 5-7, it's like Lenore Sellers.
Defensive line.
And Lenore Sellers being
that guy.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it. First of all, the wide receiver is a huge question mark. They get Rocket Sanders. So is it like they want to be Arkansas with like a KJ Jefferson Sanders backfield and hope it works, even though it just didn't work at Arkansas, really? Like, is that like the vision? I don't like their OC Loggins.
Oh, yeah.
The offensive line was terrible last year. They return a bunch. So, like, I guess that's something. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's the defensive line being game wreckers and the offense being like a devastating run game, like a nice little like RPO. Rocket Sanders is
with
healthy.
Nick Harbor sprinting, running 100-meter dashes for a deep ball once a week.
And you look at last year. They went 5-7. They lost all but one game by more than one score. They beat one team over 500 in the SEC, and that was Kentucky. And we just talked about that game was kind of a like they won, but it wasn't like a crowning achievement. They more just didn't lose that game. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not super high on this team. It just the talent just isn't there.
The defense is. I mean, I could see a world where the offense figures some stuff out. I mean, to your point, like I guess they were 132nd last year in yards per carry and O-line run push, 129th in rushing yards per game, and 116th in explosive rush. So I hope the running game steps forward for them because, like, otherwise, like Spencer Rattler low key like was doing some pretty amazing stuff at times, like just freewheeling and putting the team on his back. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I think Sellers is going to be a good player, but do I think that South Carolina just hit on 2 top 5 round NFL draft picks at quarterback in a row? Probably not. That would surprise me. So, yeah, I mean, I think that they did do a good job, like coming down the stretch on defense. And you saw that in that Kentucky game. Like if you look at their opponent adjusted defensive rating over the final 5 games of the year, they were 10th out of 70 Power 5 teams. So
Mm,
that more than respectable.
yeah.
Um, we'll see though. It's like you say all that stuff, and it's like, oh, that's nice, but at the end of the day, they got to go play the games against
Yeah.
the teams we just named. I
I
could
have
see
them.
them losing to ODU in week 1. Like that wouldn't
Yeah.
surprise
I have them favored in 4 games against ODU, Akron, Wofford, and at Vanderbilt.
me. Mhm.
After that, I mean, again, to get the win total, you gotta get 2, and I just at
What's the
Kentucky.
win total? 5.5.
Yeah,
Yeah, dude.
yeah. And again, they won 5 last year. So, are you that confident that they're really improving? Again, schedule is just an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, they lose Juice Wells, they lose Spencer Rattler, and take a step forward. Hard to figure that one.
Yeah. A team that I think we agree on that they're probably better than what their record at the end of the year will be, and that's Florida,
Uh
who
huh.
I think we could agree that they have the hardest schedule in the entire country.
Yeah.
Uh, they lose Ricky Pearsall, they lose Trevor Etienne on the offense, but Graham Mertz, as a Wisconsin guy, I gotta tip my cap. Played pretty solid, didn't make any mistakes. I don't think he asked for much more. They were top 15 EPA per play. Offensive line was an issue. I mean, Mertz, 16 passes that went 20 or more yards last season. That being said, they did go into the portal and get some guys that maybe could stretch the field. Maybe they're going to have to stretch the field given the schedule.
Yeah.
Elijah Badger from Arizona State, DK, who comes from Wisconsin, has a relationship with Mertz. UG Wilson's back. So maybe this team starts to open it up more this season. I don't know. I don't know if Mertz really wants to do that, but the defense was absolutely terrible last season. They were out to the top 100 in EPA per play. Not much back. They're counting on transfers, Power 5 transfers or Power 4 transfers, but the schedule I think is just too hard to really have like a true assessment of this team, right?
Yeah, I think the schedule is just
Yeah.
really tough. I do like Mertz more than most just because I think, the kind of dink and dunk nature of their offense last year was just as much sort of due to the lack of receiving talent that they had
Mm.
as any flaw in him, really. Montreal Johnson, good back. I think their offensive line is probably, a little bit better than people give them credit for, right? Like they, are I mean, they're 31st last year in the country in O-line run push. It's not bad. I I just all those things, like I think they will be a better team than they were last year. I'll say that. And I wouldn't be surprised on any level if they beat Miami in week 1, just because
I agree. I think 100. I could see that 100%. I like Florida in that game.
yeah, it's just, other than Miami, Stanford at Mississippi State, what wins am I for sure giving them? I can't give them UCF for sure even,
No,
like
UCF's good.
yeah.
UCF is like legit, like power. They are a Power 4 team now. They have the
And that
talent there.
yeah, and the Florida run defense last year was pretty abysmal. I mean, they were 131st in explosive rush allowed, 111th in yards per carry allowed. Like it was bad all around. So I did have like a weird experience filling out my preseason all SEC first and second team and like making a list of like, okay, it's like they're asking me to list like 6 offensive linemen, and it's like Florida guy is like right here at 7 or 8, and it's like that. It felt like that at a lot of positions, which is to say, I think they have a lot of like good talent. I don't know that they have very many elite players. DJ Lagway is gonna be that guy at some point in his career. I don't think though that we'll see him much this year. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think if they make a bowl game, then I I won't be surprised by any means, but I think they'll have done a really good job as a staff and as a team, kind of holding themselves together and taking things week by week. That Texas A&M game week 3 at home feels like kind of a must-have for them. But there is a world where they could be 4-0 starting the year and then go play UCF and be 5-0 before going to Tennessee and then lose the next 7.
Yeah, do you think is there I mean, I guess it's too hard to tell right now, but it's more like do they fire Napier mid-year or do they just
No.
kind of they just let this run out?
I think, well, A, yeah. I mean, I think B, the reality is that next year they've got the reverse of the schedule, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think they really want him to make it through this year because buyout and just uh, do you really want to bring a first year coach in to face this schedule again?
Yeah.
Like they're going to have to go every game that's a home game is going to be an away game and vice versa next year. So
Yeah.
I think they want him to make it, but he's got to give them a reason.
You gotta do
It can't
I
be
like
3-9.
yeah, bowl game, I think he keeps his job.
Yeah, I could even see 5 wins keeping his job if they're the right 5 wins.
Yeah, because
Like,
also I think everybody understands this one. Everyone's like, "We get it." Like, the
right,
schedule is absolutely like, just don't lose at Mississippi State. Like, just
right,
like
exactly. Yeah, if he wins 5, but 2 of those are Miami and FSU, dude will be fine.
yeah, exactly. What about Arkansas? Does Sam Pittman keep his job?
No,
Yeah, I don't think
unfortunately.
so either.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what they're doing with the Boise transfer will be kind of fun, and Petrino might put a little life in the offense, but I just don't. I mean, that offensive line last year really struggled. I know Pittman's a good OL guy. Eric Mateos, who they brought in from Baylor, is also a good OL guy. Like those guys are good at their jobs. It's just, do they have the clay to mold for it to really matter? I think Arkansas, you know, picking them 14th in the SEC feels kind of like insulting to them, but then you really look at what they got, and it's just I don't think they're going to be any good. And I don't really, have much analysis past that.
So people like Taylor Green. I don't know. I also like I think he's super talented, but there's also like he was also benched for Maddox Matson midway last year. Like
Yeah.
it's not like he's like some surefire SEC level guy. I like Jaquindon Jackson, who comes in from Utah. He was really talented, but he was also a backup before injuries. So I don't know. I'm
I think that they should probably find like I if Petrino's as smart as I think he can be at times. I think he'll find a way to run the ball explosively and just a couple passing concepts that you're comfortable with, whether that's a rolling
yeah.
your guy out on some floods or, just trying to hit a deep ball at half kind of thing. Like, I think they can workshop something on offense, but on defense, it's going to be tough.
No real edge rush of substance here that like could really set the edge and shut really an SEC level offense down. So I think the defense probably gonna be pretty poor. Just going back to Taylor Green real quick. This is including the conference title game against UNLV. 11-9 touchdown interception ratio, completed 56% of his passes,
Yeah.
9 big time throws, 12 turnover worthy plays. Just I don't know. I'm not
Great.
sold. I mean, look, Arkansas, they're projected to win 4 or 5 games, so I'm not super. I don't know if like it's more about like can they really stun a team? I don't know if they even have the game breakers to do that. And the
Yeah.
schedule is fairly unforgiving. Some of the games that would be coin flips, they come on the road at Oklahoma State, at Auburn, even at Mississippi State, even at Missouri, if you want to throw them in. Like, I mean, their home games are in conference play are A&M, Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas. Like, to me, teams that could really just overwhelm them.
No, absolutely. I think that's correct. Yeah. I could see I could see them getting into a game with Oklahoma State or somebody like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's going to be tough.
So bottom two, I think this is where like there's like a real drop off. You can maybe throw
Yeah.
Arkansas in this group, but Miss State and Vandy, we could go rapid fire on them because I just don't know if there's much to talk about.
There's really not. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's year zero for Jeff Lebby, and it's year zero always for Clark Lee. So I just Mississippi State. I don't think they have anything close to a roster that Lebby really wants right now. So it's probably just win your non-cons, including, I
Hmm.
guess, beating Toledo, and just try and build up towards next year. Like, I really don't think like this. I think next year is where you really start to judge if Mississippi State's going in any sort of direction.
Yeah, I agree. I think success for Mississippi State this year would be, if they can grab an SEC win
Mhm.
somewhere along the way, I think that'd be something to feel good about. And you know, I mean, the wouldn't be hilarious scenario of the season would be if like a 3-8 Mississippi State shocks Ole Miss on the last week of the
Keep
year
them
and
out of the
like
playoff.
keeps them out of the playoff or something. Yeah, but I just think it's a shame for them in a way that like what Zach Arnett did there the year he was there was so detrimental
Yeah.
because like in a school like Mississippi State or Vanderbilt or wherever, like I feel like there should kind of be a rule that like you have to do something creative schematic, whether
Mhm.
that's Mullen's old, kind of read option system, that he did with Dak, or whether that's run the triple or the air raid, something like that has to be in play. And I think, because Arnett made this big sort of shift in philosophy, all these air raid guys that they had recruited leave the program, transfer out, and now you're stuck in a spot where I think if Levy was coming in a year earlier with the personnel that was sort of that should have been there if Arnett hadn't kind of run it off philosophically, then maybe there'd be a little more hope and upside. But yeah, it's going to be a tough year.
Yeah, and you returning production outside top 100 in both, and all players' substance pretty much gone.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just it's not worth getting too worked up about. I don't see much here. Win total 3.5 shaded towards the over. Like it's not worth tying up your money in this. I just don't see much of an edge here.
no, I
Yeah,
agree.
they're going to win their 3 non-cons probably, and then maybe they steal a SEC game. Vanderbilt. I hope Diego Pavia, who made me a bunch of money last year, I hope he gets the starting gig
I
and is able to make this work.
love my boy Diego.
Yeah, the defense was pretty bad. Their top 30 in returning production. I just think again, this team is so just on like just another world here where like it almost feels like they should resign from the SEC. It's tough to see them moving up at any sort of competitive nature relative to
Yeah,
where like, bringing in Texas and Oklahoma. It just feels like they're screwed.
yeah. Again, success here is. I mean, I do think they'll be a better team than they were last year with Pavia coming in, and
Mhm.
you know, uh, there is at least 69% returning production on defense, which is. I know that not all returning production is good production, obviously, but like at least there's some
Yeah.
continuity. But yeah, it's. I mean, like you look at Georgia's roster, they got London Humphreys on there, who was a bright spot offensively for Vandy last year. Like it is going to always be this way, and you're basically just they're relying on like all Big Sky players to come in the secondary as transfers, and it's tough. And they're one of those programs that the portal hurts the most, really, especially because of academics and all that. So, man, again, just like Mississippi State, if they win one SEC game, that is success. Tip your hat to them. Congratulate them for it.
So we ran through all the teams. We're gonna make it
Yeah,
under 2 hours. That was the goal. So we did it. Good job. I think we rolled. I
thank
think
you.
we gave a ton in there and we made it under 2 this time. I think last year we were at like 210, 220. So
Jam packed,
really
baby.
improvement despite picking up 2 teams. So we're getting better at this. So
No doubt.
best bets time, Graham.
Uh-huh.
I've read off a few of the win totals. If you need me to run through any of the other numbers, I'm happy to. Is there anything you're either betting or you have an opinion on a team that you're eyeing, win total, under, over, conference, anything stick out? It could also be if you want to talk like playoff or something like that.
Sure. I'm not as prepared for this as I would have liked to have been, unfortunately.
I can help.
I
I got my screen up here, so I can help as much as I can.
Yeah, so look, I think Georgia over 10.5, just since I do cover Georgia, so I will give you an opinion there. Like they haven't lost a regular season game since Dan Mullen was at Florida in November of 2020. Okay. Like there is not a coach in the SEC right now who was at the school they are currently at the last time Georgia lost a regular season. Like
That's
they
crazy.
haven't. I'm sorry, I should say that they haven't lost to a sitting SEC coach. Like
Okay, got it, got
know,
it. It's that's still crazy though.
Freeze was at Ole Miss. in 2016, Kirby's first year, and beat Georgia. He's the only coach in the league with a win against Georgia.
That's
So,
something.
yeah, like I know they haven't faced Sark before, but I can see them losing one. You get room for them to lose one with this over under of 10.5. It's -120, -122, depending on where you're putting it. Like that's pretty normal juice for a bet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so I like it. I think it's a good play. You got the cushion for a slip up, and generally speaking, if you look at Georgia under Kirby Smart, if they do lose a game, they usually get kind of better from it and improve. So I like that play. I am pretty I'm pretty similar in terms of I'm going under on Texas 10.5. I think that Texas loses at least two, and like we said earlier, I don't hate that alt line play of coming in and going under 9.5 at I think plus 160 it was. Go ahead. I got to look for something else real quick.
No, you're good. So
if you got some other plays.
No, I played Kentucky over 6.5. That's -122. That's just a team I project to be a little bit better than the market does. And I also played Alabama under 9.5. It's -130 at Caesars. Again, this is a team where if you're playing these win totals, especially towards the under, I like having more downside risk than upside risk. Like again, the upside on a 9.5 is this team's going to flirt with an undefeated season, 11-1. I think that there's more downside where this team could end up. The year gets away from and DeBoer gets kind of a year off type thing. It's more of a. It sounds silly because it's Alabama, but more of like a year zero type situation. Like I think it lands 9 or 8 a lot more than it does 10 or 11. So I'm willing to lay it there. So Bama and Kentucky, and then the Texas number's a little too pricey for me, so I won't give that out. But Bama and Kentucky were the two that were on my radar.
Yeah. So what do you? Yeah, I like Oklahoma under 7.5 at -115.
Yeah, it's tough it's tough to go over on a number like that.
Yeah, I also don't hate at all taking a flyer on them under 6.5 at plus 225. I think there's value there. I kind of believe in general with some of these future bets, like unless you're just cash rich, like if you're going to tie up betting capital for essentially 4 months of the year, like find some upside, swing for the fences in some spots and look for some spots where like you can kind of make the unit that you want to make without putting in a full unit in return at certain places. I'm trying to find there's one other. I'm trying to find what Texas A&M's alt line win total was.
Oh wait, I get you here. I had it before when I pulled up the Texas. They were right next to each other.
Here we go. Okay. So yeah, that's tough. I don't know if I like A&M's alt line total is 9.5, which is too steep for me. But I will go over 8.5 for them. I think that Elko adds enough continuity, organization to come in and kind of do that. And from what I can tell, that play is pretty evenly juiced right now in terms of
you could get that. I have FanDuel up. That is -122. So I'm sure if you click around, you could find around -115, -120, or -122. My only concern with A&M, which is I would lean over, just Notre Dame week 1 just feels like such a fork in the road game that I'd rather bet A&M in that game, and then like sit and get my money then than kind of sit the whole season out, if that makes sense. I know.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
That might not be the best, I guess, like betting decision, but that's more in terms of tying up my money, in terms of where the season could go. I'd feel much, much worse about the win total outside of like losing the game. Like if they lose to Notre Dame, I'm just like, like that one feels like it's almost worth 2.
No, I hear you there. I I also, if you don't like playing the win total angle with Texas, you can get them no on making the college football playoff at plus 180. That's really not a bad play to me. And
That's where once Texas started the understart game bet, that's where I kind of put my eye towards, because
mhm,
I guess there's a 10-2 Texas probably gets into the playoff off the top of my head.
right.
Probably, but yeah, I'm gonna have to click around on that, so I won't give out that play. But Texas missed the playoff. I had that jotted down as well. It's more about like playing out the scenarios of like
Sure. Yeah.
where this goes. So then who do you, if you had to pick like an SEC championship game before I let you go, Georgia versus who?
Uh I guess, I picked Georgia and Alabama on my SEC preseason ballot, just again, kind of out of some level of sort of habit or whatever. Um, the more that I've kind of dug into that, I I still like Georgia to be there, but I really honestly struggling with like not knowing what the tiebreakers are in the SEC this
Yeah,
year is
what is?
tough.
I should have asked at the beginning. I have no idea.
We don't know.
I
Sankey didn't
That's
tell
crazy.
us at media days, which I thought was kind of ridiculous. I I'm gonna go Georgia Ole Miss. I
Okay.
think I think I like Ole Miss to get there. But I still wouldn't totally sleep on Alabama. I know all the stuff that you said makes sense. Everything we talked about makes sense. I just think like there may be kind of personally, I think DeBoer's best chances to win big are going to be year 1, year 2, not year 3 on, because
Mhm.
I think the Alabama machine that has been built, it's like if he can kind of step in behind the wheel of that, then things might work out for him for a little while.
Yeah, that makes sense. He's got win early. Makes sense. Uh, I'll go Georgia, Tennessee. I gotta stick to my guns. Shoot for the high outcome.
All right. I like it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
hey, if you're right,
why
then we
not?
can play this back and be like, told y'all.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So I guess for the cloud, Tennessee to win the SEC 18-1 will be the final bet. I'll bet it myself. Put my money where my mouth is.
just do it, be
Uh,
legend. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. But Graham, I appreciate it. You crushed it as per usual. You are the go-to source for all Georgia stuff and obviously the greater SEC football landscape. We can follow you on Twitter at Graham Coffey DC and his great work over at Dogs Central. You can follow me on Twitter at Reed Wallach. The bets are at betstamp at RW33, and all the bets we just shared are inside the bet tracker below. We will be back next week. Conference USA season preview. Until then, enjoy your weekend. College football is that much